Welcome to Fraud Friday. I'm Bob Coleman. Today I want to talk about Stephanie Hockridge, Nathan Reese, co-founders of Blueacorn. Stephanie was convicted by a federal jury for PPP loan fraud back in June. She was sentenced last month to 120 months in jail. She has to report December 30th. I want to discuss the attempts by her attorney to have her remain on bail while her appeal is pending. Regarding Nathan, his sentence is scheduled for December 18th. The two are obviously tied hip to hip as they are married. And let's examine what's going to happen. I want to clear up a couple things or clarify a couple things, and that is the money. Always follow the money. There's this magic number that appears throughout PPP loan recipients who receive $20,832 or $20,833. How did that number come about? That was their Schedule C income, and that was the maximum amount of money that they could obtain. The rules were very specific. Sole proprietorships could get up to credit for up to $100,000 of income. It was 2.5 months. Therefore, you saw a slew of applications with that magic $20,832 or $33 number. Why was that? Let's go back in time. We're talking March, April 2020, and the government was concerned about, as well as SBA, of getting money out to Main Street quickly. Well, here in April, this is before people filed their tax returns, but more importantly, everyone was closed down. The IRS was closed down. Traditionally, banks would go and verify those tax returns with the IRS to verify that the numbers were correct. Well, the powers that be said, if we do that, we're not going to get money to these people because the IRS is in no position to verify those tax returns. So therefore, we will allow the borrower to present a draft of their 2024 tax return as documentation for the amount of money they could receive. The intent was not to be sloppy. The intent was to realize the realities that the IRS was in simply no position. They had no personnel to get this verification to the banks. And of course, that verification takes time. It takes a week or two. And again, the concern is we want money rolled out quickly. Remember, SBA built this program within a week. So that's why you see that. Okay, so let's go through it. The borrower submits the draft tax return. They show they made $100,000 worth of income and they could get that loan. Now they got the loans. The problem was in forgiveness. In order to have that loan forgiven, they then had to document, well, these are our actual filings of the tax return, and here's the IRS verification that the SBA could follow through normal procedures. Well, the people who relied on Blueacorn, who fraudulently said, hey, just put down that you get $100,000 of income, you get free $20,000 worth of money. That was their pitch, and that was fraudulent. And Stephanie's defense was saying, well, we relied on the borrower's information. The problem was Blueacorn coached them on how to fill out these Schedule Cs. The testimony was rife of how it was a production factory, and they had the people unwillingly sign, and now all of those people are on the hook. And that sets the stage for that $65 million restitution amount that she was charged with. The $65 million is important. Federal sentencing guidelines put someone in prison based on how much of a loss there was. And the numbers all over the board. The Senate said there was $1 billion in fees paid to Blueacorn. Well, obviously some of those were legit. And how you got to that $65 million, the defense is saying, well, the numbers are all over the board. We don't know how we do that. And the government conservatively said, hey, this is a conservative number. Let's go through that. First of all, let's see what the defense is saying. Now, she's scheduled to report on December 30th by 2 p.m. in Byron, Texas, into a federal correctional women's institute that's famous in the news. That's where Epstein's co-conspirator Giselle is residing, and that's been all over the news. So the defense is saying, look, we don't want her to report. The other thing they've done, which is just informational, is they have an infant son, and obviously Nathan's going to be sentenced, I'm guessing the same amount of time. And so they're arguing for staggered sentences. They're saying, hey, if you put these people in jail, the parents on an infant, that's effectively going to make the person, that poor individual, that poor baby, an orphan. So they're saying, okay, let one person serve the 10 years and the other person will serve the 10 years after that. This is their position. So the defense is saying, hey, she's not a flight risk. And of course, the appeal raises substantial questions of law that are likely to result in an acquittal. And that's the appropriate posturing by the defense is what they should do. They want to represent their client. She has strong family ties to the district, including her infant son. The fact that Ms. Hockridge's location is already monitored via an ankle monitor, further demonstrates that the appropriate release conditions are more than sufficient to ensure she is not a flight risk. She is not a danger to the community. The court expressly found at sentencing that Ms. Hockridge was unlikely to commit any further crimes. Why? Well, the PPP loan program is no longer around. That finding makes sense, is that she had no other criminal history, was not convicted of a crime involving violence or controlled substances, and the conspiracy for which she was convicted ended years ago. One of the things that she has a problem with was the testimony of a witness by the name of Eric Carnazes. And Eric has a checkered past, but he was very open about that. And the defense obviously was trying to impeach him as much as possible. She said, the court said that she tried to introduce evidence that contradicted him, that the court wouldn't allow that, and that she was clearly sent emails to the loan processors on how to root out fraud, and messages in which she worked to rectify fraudulent applications submitted by Eric's associate. So they're saying, hey, she didn't have a chance to do that. Of course, the prosecution disagrees. Let me talk about the loan amount. What the defense is saying, and the reason why this $65 million is so important, the amount of the fraud, the greater the fraud, the greater the term in prison. So they want to get that number as down as possible. What they said, the defense is saying, now wait a minute, time out. You have calculated it on the amount that was dispersed, not the amount of the actual loss. They cited the example. If a defendant was a recipient of food stamps having a value of $100, but fraudulently received $150, the loss is only $50. The problem with that argument is these loans, we don't know what the loss is. We know they were fraudulently induced. I go back to my example of the hairstylist. She put in $100,000 at income. She got the loan. That loan is not forgiven. The fraudulent proceeds went to her, and she's now on the hook to pay that back. And whether she will pay that back or not, who knows? But that's a long process. The defense is saying, well, wait a minute. If she pays it back, it wasn't fraud. I'm not taking sides, well, I am taking a side, but that is their argument that, well, if she pays it back, there was really no fraud. Well, as clearly indicated, the fraud was when she lied about that was her draft statement, and then she lied on attempting to get the forgiveness. So lying to the government is the key issue here. They got now, how much money was there? The Senate also said that there was $250 million plus that was distributed to the Blueacorn founders. The report said, hey, what we did, however, was we looked at that and we figured Stephanie and Nathan got about $129 million of that. Well, who knows how much they got? All I do know is they live in a very nice condominium in Puerto Rico. That's where they there's the video that she took. She posted on her Facebook account of the nice ocean breeze I guess you can't video ocean breeze. You can video the ocean waves. You can infer the ocean breeze as she walks out on the patio with Nathan, her husband, on the cell phone. But they got the probation officer, and the probation officer said, hey, Ms. Hockridge continues to be in compliance of her parole conditions. Excuse me, her parole is the wrong word, of her conditions of the bail. I don't have any concern as to the moment. September 18th, 2025, a UA analysis, I assume that's a urine analysis, was conducted, and it was a negative result. So she's saying, hey, we don't have issues from that standpoint. Obviously, the prosecution is disagreeing with what the defense is saying. And the prosecution is saying, no, 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 no. You had the opportunity to cross-examine Eric if you didn't like his character or what he had to say. And this is specific directly from their court filing, says, finally, Hockridge's loss amount argument is not a substantial or novel issue likely to result in a term of imprisonment shorter than the appeal. The government says, there's well documented, and the court agreed to this. Eric testified in court that approximately 90% of the $100 million funded, not applied for, funded loans he brought in were fraudulent. The court says his testimony was credible, including as it relates to the loss evaluation. The court's credibility finding alone confirms that approximately $65 million in the loss was a conservative estimate, and I believe it was. Obviously, when you have these types of situations, how to come up with a loss is critical, but the government took the conservative loss. They based it solely on one witness. They have the track record of all of those applications, and he said, hey, yeah, it was all fraudulent. What, again, let's be specific and fraudulent. They coached the borrower, and coached is the wrong word. They prepared the Schedule C draft for the borrower to sign. And so the borrower says, you sign this and you get 20 grand. I'll conclude with this one story. She tried to get her father a PPP loan. And she said, hey, fill out these forms and we can get mom 20 grand. And her father said, no, wait a minute. The numbers, I can't do that based on our income and whatever. She doesn't qualify for that. And no, I do not want to go down the road of submitting a draft tax return for 2019 that shows we made that money. He put his, he said, that's a bridge I'm not going to cross. And unfortunately, too many people did. They committed fraud by saying, this is my, even though it's a draft, you still have to certify, yes, this is what I'm going to submit to the IRS. Remember, again, I'm repeating myself, there was no one at the IRS to verify this. That's why Congress approved it, that we're going to allow borrowers to receive money based on draft tax returns. And the SBA said, yes, we understand. Otherwise, it's going to get bogged down by the bureaucratic red tape. He said no. Unfortunately, $90 million of Eric's borrowers did not. Thank you for joining me on Fraud Friday.